Let's talk about DNS because apparently, and even though we've had DNS since 1980 something, a lot of people are still a little confused. So let's talk about it. DNS, I like to refer to it as the liver of the internet, okay? Because most people don't think about it until it stops working, but nothing on the internet works without it. So let's talk about what DNS is. And more specifically, I'm going to show you some things that I hope will help you get your DNS under control and make it more useful. In this webinar, we're going to talk about three things. What is DNS? How is DNS used? And how is DNS distributed around the world? We're going to talk a little bit of that, what we like to refer to in the industry as propagation. So sit back, relax, grab a mug of your favorite beverage. Let's talk DNS. So what is DNS? Everybody on the internet uses it, but most people don't really understand what it is. At its heart, DNS simply converts domain names to IP addresses. See, networks don't understand domain names. They only understand machine addresses, okay? But humans don't like the addresses because they don't mean anything to us. So we came up with a system. The internet started here in the US way back in the late 60s, and it was called ARPANET back then. And there were so few servers on ARPANET that everybody basically knew the addresses for them and knew how to get around and how to get in. But as things began to grow, it became apparent that this wasn't going to work. This wasn't going to scale well. So in 1972, a lady named Peggy Karp created a system by which all the machine names were stored in a file called hosts.txt. Now, we actually still have the vestige of that on most machines these days. Even Windows, if you search far enough, you can find a host.txt file, although most of the stuff these days is don't use hosts. You'll see it especially in developer servers or local servers that are running. I have a couple servers here at the house, and I put specific addresses in my host.txt file just to make things easier. But back in 72, we only had one host TXT, and Stanford Research Institute maintained the master copy of this file. And whenever a change was needed, you emailed somebody at Stanford Research and says, hey, can you add this domain name or this machine name to the host.txt file? And here's the IP address. That's all it took to add somebody to the internet. So, and they would update the host.txt file and put it out on their FTP server. And usually once a night or a couple times a week, all the servers overnight would dial in, pick up that copy and put it there. And that's how we did DNS for about 10 years. This kind of worked, but everybody began to see the cracks in the facade there and realized that as it was already planning that the internet would be beginning to open up. But even for scientific research, just one host.txt file wasn't going to scale to the level that we needed. So in 1981, Dr. David Mills authored what we call in the internet industry an RFC, or a request for comment. And it's basically a proposal that says, hey, I'm proposing this and I'm wanting all my colleagues to comment on it. So RFC 799 is called Internet Domain Names. And that's the beginning of what we now have as DNS, or the domain name system. Things started to move in 1982. And actually the first internet names were registered in 1983. But by most historical accounts, 85 was the birth of the modern DNS system as we know it. Now, today we have a very distributed DNS system. There are thousands of DNS servers distributed around the world, and they all answer DNS requests. And all of them, when they don't know the answer, they talk to a root server, or a DNS root server. Now, back in the day when the internet opened up, 1993, when the internet opened up for commercial use, there were exactly two root servers for DNS, May East and May West. and they were located on the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States, respectively. And a company called Network Solutions, or NetSol, was the one that was in charge of controlling them. And for the longest time, if you wanted a domain name, you bought it from NetSol. I bought the first probably 4 or 5 of them from them. But that wouldn't scale. And these days, the domain system is run by a non-government organization, or an NGO. And instead of just 2 servers, we have 13 root servers distributed worldwide. And their basic function is to talk to each other and maintain a stable naming system. And when a host doesn't know a name, it talks to them and says, hey, do you know this one, so that I can go get it? And it points them in the right direction. These days, instead of sending an email to somebody at Stanford Research Institute, if you want to add something to the DNS system, you purchase a domain. Actually, you lease a domain, okay? Domain names are not physical property. You can't own them, but as long as you pay for them, you are allowed access to it. But these days, you go to your registrar and you purchase a domain name, and how much you pay depends largely on your registrar and the type of domain that you're buying. Now, your registrar is who you get your domain names from. If you don't have a good registrar, SiteGround is actually a registrar. So if you're in the process of spinning up a new site, one of the options is new site, new domain, and you put in the domain name you want, and they'll walk you through the process. They will sell you the domain, and then they go ahead and set everything up for you. It's actually pretty cool. There are many other registrars out there, some that host websites, some that do not. But where you host it or what registrar you use is not nearly as important these days as it used to be. So let's get a couple terms out of the way. First of all, domain name, okay? Example.com. And example.com actually breaks down into 2 parts. Example is actually the domain, and .com is what we call the top level domain, okay? And they're always separated by a dot, okay? So we've got example.com, that's our domain name. If I wanted www.example.com, because in the early days, almost all websites were hosted like that, www is the machine name. And the reason we did that was we might have several different services running on a given domain, but way back in the day, computers weren't strong enough like they are now. They weren't strong enough to handle multiple processes at the same time. If you had a very popular website and you also ran your mail server on the same machine, you could not be getting mail for a while because the web server is taking up all the resources. So we made it to where you could break them apart. You can also have subdomains, marketing.example.com, and marketing can have machine names. But at its root, when we say domain name, we mean whatever dot the top level domain. That's your domain name. Then there's the DNS server. Every domain has a zone file, and that's even true today. Although these days you generally don't edit the zone file. Back in the day, we used to have to bring up a text editor and manually edit the zone or text files called the zone file. And it was really a pain. It was incredibly easy to screw things up and make it to where your domain could not be found at all. These days, most of your editing of your DNS is done through a website or a web page, and everything is checked before it's put in there, so you can't put bad data in. But the domain name server is the server that is in charge of your domain, and that means it has your zone file. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we tell everybody what our domain servers are. But that's the authoritative record for your web server or your website or your domain. And then we have the registrar, and the registrar is the company that you purchase your domain from. And generally speaking, your registrar will allow you to specify the domain names that are, or the domain name servers that are in charge of your domain name. If you are purchasing, if SiteGround is your registrar, it's automatically going to add its name servers into your domain so that the root servers know where to go when somebody asks for whatever your domain is, and they'll point them right down to that. Most registrars will automatically add them in. Some registrars, especially those that don't host websites, will make it very easy for you to change them. But be warned, if you change them, you can take your website off the internet if you don't do it correctly. Okay, if you've not been doing this a while, I highly recommend you finding a professional, or if you've got a friend who is very tech savvy or something like that, and ask them to help you if you're messing with your domain or your registrar record. Also, side note, if you are hiring somebody to build your website, please don't let them register your domain. I've seen so many people come to me and says, Cal, I need you to rebuild my website. I said, fine, we'll put it over on my server so I can get access to it. And they say, oh, I can't do that. This person that's no longer my friend actually owns the domain, or the company that built my website owns the domain, and I have to pay them an extra fee if I want the domain back. Don't let anybody register your domain name. That's like somebody else registering your 800 number, okay? You want to own this. That's one of the critical things in web development. Okay, so where is your DNS? Now that we understand how we got here, let's make sure we understand where everything is located, okay? Like I said, your registrar will ask you, what are your domain name servers that you want to host your zone file at? So your registrar is one piece of it. Your DNS servers are another piece, and your actual website is the third piece. And it's fine to have all of those in the same company. Okay, if you're hosting with SiteGround, you put in, I want to do a new domain, and you put in your domain name, and SiteGround will walk you through purchasing that domain. They will automatically set up your registrar record and your zone file so that you can go in and start tinkering with it. If you don't do it that way, you have to do everything manually. Now, I will admit, I am old. I've been doing this since about 96. And most of my websites, I have registrar is this company. My DNS host is actually, or DNS servers are actually this one. And my website host is this one. There's no practical advantage to that these days for about 90% of the websites out there. If you're a very large company, then you've probably got staff on hand that can advise you on that. And maybe for you there is, but for most websites, there's absolutely no advantage to that. These are some old habits that I developed a long time ago, and old habits are just hard to break. So what do our DNS name servers look like? Well, when you go to your registrar, and if it's SiteGround, they do this for you. It's going to ask you, what are your DNS entries? One of my registrars is a company called Hover, which is part of 2Cows. Hover will put placeholder DNS entries in there until I decide where I'm going to put the website. Hover doesn't actually host websites, so they, putting them in as an option, but you have to have something there just to register the website. So they'll put in placeholders and point your website to a coming soon page until you actually change the DNS records. This is what it looks like. And this is a machine name, NS1, nameserver1.siteground.net, nameserver2. Now you have to have at least 2. Some places will give you 3, 4. I've actually had companies give me 5 before, but you have to have at least 2. And the reason is, if for some reason ns1.siteground.net went down, or it was swamped with other requests, then anybody looking for your domain, they can roll over to NS2. And in reality, the way DNS works under the hood, these are given to whoever asks for your domain. These domain name servers are given to them in a randomized order. So it's not always, I'm going to go to 1 first, and then I'm going to go to 2, and then I'm going to go to 3, and whatever. It just picks, or it'll give them to in a random order. And usually we pick the top one, whatever the order is. And we say we're going to go to that one. Here's what one looks like. Signalingphp.com is an old site I had for a book I wrote, and I chose it for this this webinar. But and I just spun up a new site for it. But you'll notice down here, Okay, they give me the ability to edit, and I've put SiteGround's name servers in there. That means that anybody that goes and says, hey, I want the information for signaling.php or signalingphp.com, the root servers are going to go, oh, well, you want to go to SiteGround. Okay. And SiteGround will tell you everything you need to know about this domain. Now, what can you find out? Well, it turns out you can find out an awful lot. There used to be a tool, a command line tool way back in the day called Whois. And Whois, you could type Whois and a domain name, and it would spit out all kinds of information. Then we turned it into a website called whois.sc. And for the longest time, that was the authoritative record for any given domain. Whois.sc actually still works, but it points you to domain tools. But you can still go in and do the same thing. You can put in a domain name and find out everything that can be found out about a given domain. Now, you'll notice registrant, org, country, all of that, that's all marked as private. It's got a customer ID, but they actually have to contact Tucows, and Tucows will contact me and say, this person's trying to contact you. Would you like to? I turn this on every domain I have because it doesn't cost me anything. And it's just registration privacy. If your web host or if your registrar allows that and doesn't charge for it, I highly recommend this because this keeps all of your information off of the web. And then the registrar, if I haven't turned on privacy, this is going to have my company name. This is going to have my physical address, my email address, and all of that. And then it tells me a few things, like I registered this in 2013 when I wrote the book. And this is the name servers because I just recently changed that. It also tells me down here, where is it? The IP address, and this particular domain has only been hosted on 2 different computers. Okay, it tells me there's 2 unique IP addresses over 9 years, and that's because it was hosted on my server for the longest time. But when I decided that I'm letting this one go, I decided to use it for this webinar, so I moved it over to SiteGround. Also, very interesting, tells me what the server's located. Okay, SiteGround uses distributed servers all around the world, and the IP address assigned to this one is assigned to Google, and they have said we're using it in our Iowa data center. Now, that's all fair and good. And then here's an old picture of the website, although these days it doesn't look anything like that. That's all fine and good. But there's also more information. Now, this is what Whois used to look like back when we first started. If you typed in Whois and signalingphp.com in a command line, it would spit out all of this. And we've still got all of this up here, but we've also got registrant name, admin name, and tech name. Because back in the day, there really were 3 distinct roles that people needed to talk to. Either you were the admin, if somebody wanted to buy the domain or they had a problem with something that you were doing, they'd go to the admin. If they had a tech problem, then we also had a place to put in a tech content or tech contact. So back in the day, it used to be registrant was me, admin was always my wife, and tech was always me because she's going to answer any billing or anything like that problems. I'm going to answer if there is a problem with email or something like that. So that all still exists. These days with that privacy check, all of it says the exact same thing. And if you send an email to signalingphp.com, then at contact privacy, then Tucows is going to notify me that somebody's looking for me. I have the option of answering or not, but you don't have my information like it used to be in the day. Okay, so if you're using SiteGround, and like I said, I've pointed signaling.php to ns1 and ns2.siteground.net, so I can use SiteGround's DNS zone editor to edit all of my zone records. And we're going to talk a bit about text and MX and A records in just a second, but all of these together make up what we call your zone, okay? And the important ones are these 2 right here, signalingphp.com and www.signalingphp.com. And you'll see that those both point to the exact same IP address. That way, if my website answers, regardless of whether you type in signalingphp.com or www.signalingphp.com. Now, SiteGround adds a lot of other stuff. I haven't used FTP in forever, but they add one in there, and it's running an FTP server. So if I felt like it, I could. Same thing with auto config is something they use, but all of these point to the same place. So let's talk a little bit about the types of DNS records there are out there. Now, I showed you that list and your zone, or my zone file for this, and it had 3 distinct types. It had text, MX, and A. A is by far the most common one, and an A record converts a domain name and machine, or domain and machine name, into an IP address. So you can see here, I've got an A record, and it's for www.signalingphp.com, and it points to this IP address. In the SiteGround zone editor, if I wanted to edit that, I can click here. Basically, the only thing in a zone record, or an A zone record you can an A record you can edit, is I could change the IP address. Technically, it is possible for me to have signalingphp.com at one IP address and www.signalingphp.com at a separate address. I don't recommend that. That'd be kind of a stupid arrangement, but if I felt like it, I could. And then I could also delete this A record if I got it wrong or just decided I didn't want www anymore. Then let's talk about the MX records. Now, MX records stand for Mail Exchanger. This record points to the mail servers that send and receive your email. This is kind of important. This is not the server that you talk to read your email. This is the server that you talk to, that other servers talk to send you email. And with MX record, unlike domain name server records, you don't have to have multiple ones, but almost everybody does. Okay, this stems from the fact that back in the day, the internet was not nearly as stable as what it is today, and machines might go offline overnight or for a day at a time. And if that happened and a server couldn't find a server to send it to, the mail wouldn't go. So we've got multiple MX records, and unlike name server records, these are in priority order: priority 10, priority 20, priority 30. So when somebody tries to send mail to signalingphp.com, it's going to go to mx10.mailspamprotection.com, because that's what SiteGround uses for its mail server. Now, the MX10 here is the machine name. The 10 is the same, but that doesn't have to be that, okay? It can be mail 1, mail 2, mail 3, however you want to do that. If for some reason the highest priority server is offline, then it'll go to the second highest priority. And then if that one's offline, it'll go to the third highest priority. When this one comes back up online, it knows all the other servers that deal with the mail. So it goes to all the other ones and says, hey, you got an email for me, and they'll send it back down. It's what we call a store and forward system. Okay. If that first one can't pick it up, it's stored at the second and third one until that first one comes back up. The first one comes back up, it all goes down. And that's what's going to process the mail and hand it to the right server. And usually the right server is the server that you use to read your email. Now, priority numbers, we usually by convention, not by any magic or not by any requirement, we use in increments of 10. So 10, 20, 30 instead of 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3 would work just fine, but by convention, we always number them in units of 10. And also, you'll notice that this doesn't point to an IP address. It points to another host name or another domain and machine name. So if I were running my own mail server for signaling.php, I would probably have mail.signalingphp.com as my priority 10, but then I would also have to define an A record for that one. SiteGround's running my mail, so mailspamprotection.com, they've got MX records, or they've got A records at that DNS entry that point to MX10, MX20, and MX30. But it's not enough just to put a domain name and a machine name in here. This actually has to correspond with an A record, because when the mail server gets that, it's going to say, oh, MX10. Now, let me go look up MX10 and find out what the IP address is. Because remember, computers don't use domain names. Humans use domain names. Computers use the IP address. Then we have text records. Now, text records usually or used to be just ways to put notes in there. If you wanted to put a humorous note, I've seen several humorous notes. I've seen people that put entire quotes and stuff in their text records, and it used to be the fun thing to do, because then if you were running a NS lookup or something like that to get information about the domain, you'd get those records. These days, they actually serve a much more serious purpose. And we're going to talk a little bit about Sender Policy Framework, or SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, and their ways to harden the mail system, because the mail system is not secure by nature. And so we have to find, or we found a way to make it a little more secure using these. And they basically work off of text records. And you can see this is, these are the these are the text records for signalingphp.com. This is the SPF record, and the SPF record says that the only place valid mail can come from is 35-208-91-155. And I guarantee you that's going to coordinate with one of the mailspamprotection.com records, although I've not actually looked it up. And then we've got DKIM records and the default domain key, which helps the DMARC figure out what to do with things. So that's what text records are. Text records, basically, you say, I want to put in a text record. They say, fine, what do you want the name to be? In this one, it doesn't have a name. In this one, it's _ domain key. And in this one, it's just default. And you put that in and you put whatever text you want in there. And I don't know what the limit is. I think the limit might be like 2048 characters or something like that. I know, like with this one, they hold actually cryptographic keys stored in there. So the length of it is pretty long. You can store whatever you need in there that you want to be able to pull back up, or you want people to be able to pull back up by looking at your DNS. Finally, the one record that wasn't on there, and there's several other types of records, but they're very uncommon. And if you get to the point where you're using a AAA or a 4A record, you've probably got staff that is managing this for you. But the CNAME record is just a pointer, okay? So I set up test.signalingphp.com, and I said, this is an alias of www. So if I type in test.signalingphp.com, it's going to point me to the IP address of www.signalingphp.com. That does not mean I'm going to get the website, okay? Because the web server that's running for Signaling PHP only knows two domain names that it's supposed to answer to, and that's signalingphp.com and www.signalingphp.com. So if you go to test.signalingphp.com, you're going to get the default Apache or Nginx display screen, because it doesn't know what to do with test.signalingphp.com. But so if you're using CNAMEs, make sure that your server is set up to actually answer to those CNAMEs. But this is a great way if you used to have an old system set up. My personal site, calevans.com, is set up with a blog and a regular site. And if I wanted to combine those two, I could set a CNAME for blog.calevans.com and just point it to calevans.com. And it would actually both respond to the same one. Okay, now I mean, that's a whirlwind tour of DNS, and I hope you have picked up some things there. I'm sure there are questions being asked in the channel. I'm sure there's questions being asked in the channel. And I will get to those in just a second. So what are the uses of DNS? Well, domain name resolution, duh. Converting domain names to IP addresses. That's probably 85% of what we use the DNS for, okay? But the rest of it, remember those text records we talked about? Those are SPF, DKIM, and DMARC records. And those help us secure email, because email is not secure. If you understand how to write code, even simple PHP code, you can very easily send out an email that looks like it's from me. Back in the day, I sent a couple of them out from president@whitehouse.gov. Okay, I didn't get in any trouble on it. These days, I'd probably get in more trouble, but you can do whatever you want with it, because the from line is not, there's nothing special about it. It's just another header. And if you know how to funge those headers, you can make it look like it's coming from anybody. Well, it turns out that's a problem, because spammers have figured this out, and they've started using that to send out email that looks like it's coming from me, but wanting you to use other hosting services other than SiteGround or something like that. And I would never send you something like that. So we set up SPF and then DKIM and then DMARC. SPF is Sender Policy Framework. Sender Policy Framework basically is a text record in your DNS that says, I send emails from these IP addresses. Okay. Now, I send from signalingphp.com. I send from SiteGround, but I also might use MailerLite.com, which is my favorite mailing list system. So if I'm going to send from MailerLite.com, I have to put their IP address in there as well, because otherwise Google will go, well, your SPF record says only this IP address, and this one is from this IP address, so I'm going to mark it as spam. Then there's DKIM, or domain keys, and Yahoo invented this back in the day, and it's been improved a lot since then. But it allows senders to connect their domains with an email through cryptographic authentication. Remember, I said that it puts the cryptographic key in there. So you can have it so that it's set up so that the server accepting the email looks in there and says, okay, your email gave me this key. I'm going to validate it against the key that I've got and make sure everything's valid before I'm going to accept it as legit. And if you've got domain keys set up or DKIM set up, and somebody sends an email without a DKIM or with a wrong DKIM, that's a real good sign that it is invalid and that it is probably spam. And then there's domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance, or DMARC. Now, DMARC builds on these other two and says, okay, we can now determine whether it came from the right address and it has the right key. What happens if this is bad? And DMARC allows us to say things like, if you get something that doesn't match, quarantine it because it's spam. And you can also get reports from different mail servers. I get, for calevans.com, I get a sampling of reports. I could turn it on and get all the reports, but I get a sampling of DMARC reports. And there are actually systems, if you're concerned about this, there are actually systems where you can send the DMARC reports automatically to a software as a service, and it opens them up and it databases them for you. And you can look at all the reports and see if somebody's sending stuff out with your name and see if your DKIM and your SPF are set up properly and everything is being honored. Okay. They're really good systems. I don't use any of them, but they are out there. And if you're sending a lot of email, and I have one of my domains that is nothing really but a mailing list. And so mailing list email reputation is very important to me. And so I've got SPF, DKIM, DMARC all set up very heavily on those. And I keep an eye on the reports coming back in to make sure that everything is being handled properly. So now let's talk about propagation. Okay, propagation is how things change. See, you go into your zone file and say, I'm no longer at IP address X, I'm now at IP address Y. That doesn't immediately start forwarding all the traffic there because DNS is heavily cached. So we have to do a little dance. The first thing you do, we have every DNS entry has a value called TTL, or time to live. If you know you're going to be moving a website to a new IP address, then a day or two before, up to a week before, you go change that TTL, which is usually a pretty big number because it's the number of seconds this record is number of seconds that this record can be cached. Change that to a low number. I usually change it to 60. Okay, so every minute it's going to have to request a new copy of it. It can only cache for a minute, and most places honor that. There are some of the bigger providers like Comcast and stuff like that that like to play fast and loose with the rules. That's why I usually change it a day or two beforehand, because even at that, by a day or so, everybody should have the new TTL. Then when I get ready to move it, I move my site and I change the IP address on my A record to point to my new server. Now, if I've set it to 60, then within a minute, everybody picking it up is going to start seeing the new IP address. Okay, that doesn't always mean it's going to move that quickly. With signaling PHP, I use a system called Whois It Up. It's written by a friend of mine that up in Canada, and he does a good job of this. He's got servers in about 350 cities worldwide. So if I put in signalingphp.com and check the status, it's going to start looking. And as you can see, it's telling me, in Dublin, it got a 200 response on the website. And this is the IP address. And that's the IP address I would expect it to have. And, Salt Lake City, San Juan, Puerto Rico, Tokyo, and all this. And every time I run this, because I'm not a paid member of Whois It Up, every time I run this, I get 20 different cities. Okay. Now, it's going to take a while, but it'll eventually show us the trace. It'll show us how many hops from Dublin to the data center in Iowa. Okay. To let us know, well, okay, yeah, Frankfurt, there was 43 hops it had to go through to get to that server. Now, I can also do the same thing over here at whatsmydns.net. Now, Whois It Up just goes, oh, you want to know what the IP address is for that particular record, and is it available? With whatsmydns.net, I can actually say, well, maybe I want to check the MX records for signalingphp.com. And it not only tells me all the MX records, it also tells me, well, in Mexico City, there might be a problem. Actually, there's a couple of different problems. But now that doesn't necessarily mean your domain has a problem. Those servers just could be busy or just didn't respond in time, because this has to run for a lot of different people. So it might be that it's just not responding in time. And if I get, well, here Mexico is again. Okay, Mexico is not answering on this one, so there might be a problem with Mexico. It's almost never a problem with your domain at this point. Okay, it's usually a problem with the name, with the DNS caching server at, in this case, it would be Total Play, San Jose, California. Oh, Corporate West, I've been there. Okay. That's a data center in downtown San Jose, and it's not answering fast enough. As long as the majority of them are answering, I wouldn't really worry about it. I would also make sure that you look here. Now, if you just move your domain, you're going to get several different answers, or two different answers here for a lot of these. Within 8 hours of moving your domain, you should be to the point where everything's the same. Now, remember I told you to move it to 60 seconds? Once your domain is moved and everything is settled, go back and change that, okay? Because there's absolutely no value to making a DNS server ask every time it needs your DNS record. Matter of fact, it will actually slow your site down if they've got to go do that, because most big telecom companies run caching DNS servers, and every time they make a request, they say, okay, I'm going to keep that, I'm going to cache it. So if somebody else on my network requests it, I've already got that information until it's no longer valid. So change it back. I usually change it to 86,400. That's the number of seconds in a day, which means every 24 hours, they got to ask for a new copy, but this information is not changing. So, there's no sense in them having to ask more frequently than that. I've actually seen people put a week in there, it's perfectly valid. Most caching DNS servers will ignore anything over 72 hours, and they will just they'll re-request anyhow. But a day is a good answer to that. And you can get that at whatsmydns or whoisitup.com, or whatsmydns.net or whoisitup.com. Those are my two favorite tools for this kind of stuff. DNS is an indispensable part of the internet because most of us suck at memorizing IP addresses, and IP address 4 addresses were bad enough, but IP address 6 addresses are just a nightmare to try to memorize. DNS makes it easy for us. Making sure that your DNS is handled by a reputable and technically sound company is a very important part of your online presence. You need to make sure that whomever you choose to host your DNS, your registrar, host your DNS zone file, is technically capable of managing this. Now, I started my first hosting company in 1996, and I actually ran a DNS server for about 10 years, and I will never, ever do that again. DNS servers are one of the 2 most hackable services out there. DNS and SMTP mail servers are incredibly difficult to secure and keep secured, and hackers are always trying to get in there and mess with things, because if they can change the DNS record on your domain to point to their website, then until somebody notices, everybody that tries to go to your website is going to their stuff because they have made the change. So I don't run my own DNS servers anymore, even though I am technically capable of doing it. It really takes a specialist. Make sure whoever you're using is a specialist in this. Make sure they have fast servers and a high uptime. If you miss any of these, then you could be missing from the internet without anybody explaining it. Now, if you haven't found a registrar and a DNS host that you trust, I suggest looking at SiteGround. I like them because they handle everything from registrar to DNS hosting to the website hosting. They check all the boxes, and they make it easy for you to go in and manage your DNS if you want to, or if you grow to the point where you have staff that want to. Okay, that's all I've got. Hey, thank you for listening. I need to very quickly swap over to here, and let's see. Okay, let me find where I hid the questions. Oh my God, we've got 50 questions. Okay, I won't get to all of them, but I'll get to as many of them as I can. Okay. Are there any penalties for having low TTL set on a DNS record? No, but it'll slow your, well, there's a penalty in that it slows the time to life of your, or the TTL, actually, time to first byte of your website down. See, if I'm on Comcast, I have a love-hate relationship with Comcast. I hate them, but I still pay them. But Comcast runs a caching DNS server very near me. So near me on the network. I don't know if it's near me physically. So if I go and put in signaling.php.com, it goes one network hop up and says, oh, I got a caching DNS server here. Let me ask it. If it knows it, it returns it to me immediately, and I can start seeing the website. If it doesn't, then it has to go up the line until it finds somebody that says, oh, you want to go over here to SiteGround? And SiteGround says, yeah, I know that one. Here's the IP address. So it speeds your website up if you have a longer TTL, okay? But like I said, a lot of servers these days ignore anything over 72 hours, so one day is perfectly fine. Also, it's a waste of bandwidth and resources, okay? There's no value to it, and once you have got a stable site and stable IP address, so there's no real need to do it. Okay. Where can I find details and examples? Let me read the questions. Where can I find details and examples for all possible variables that may be used in a DNS record, like an MX record, a TXT record, the variables like TTL? There are very few, okay? But if you're using SiteGround as your DNS, then you have a edit the zone, edit your DNS zone. Go click on add new, and it'll ask you, do you want to add a new A record or MX record? An MX record has a TTL, a priority, and a domain name. That's it, okay? An A record has an IP address and a TTL. A text record has a name, a value, and a TTL. There's not a lot of things that are variables involved in these, but if you just go to the DNS editor and click add new, you'll see all the ones that are there. Okay. You are saying that you get domain privacy for free. but SiteGround charges for it. Different registrars handle it differently. Okay. When I say free, what I mean is it's included in my price. I don't know that the price that I pay is more or less than what SiteGround charges. Nothing is free. Okay. So it could be that I'm just paying more and it's included in my price. Is premium DNS that much more important? Aaron, I don't know what premium DNS is. As far as I know, I mean, if SiteGround is offering a premium DNS, then they're usually offering things like faster servers or distributed to servers that are closer to people and stuff like that. That's the premiums that I have seen have been that. For the average website, if you want, that's fine. If not, you're still going to be on the DNS. If you are Facebook, oh, heck yeah, there's a lot of value for that. Okay. If you're Microsoft, if you're running a really big site, then those premium features are really important. Can I set up an alias in my DNS like www.website.com/shop? So glad you asked that. No, you cannot. DNS deals with only the domain name and the machine name, the www.website.com. It doesn't know anything about the /shop. Now, you can set up your web server to do certain things. Like I could set up shop.website.com and tell my web server that any people that come in with that DNS name should go to www.website.com/shop, should be redirected automatically. You can do that, but that's outside of your DNS server. My client has her various emails on Microsoft 365, and I'm moving her domains from NetSol to Hover. I like Cover. And I'm afraid her email delivery be interrupted. Also have some DNS settings through SiteGround account, which I work with. Any recommendations? Well, yes. If you're moving the authoritative domain or authoritative registrar from NetSol to Hover, move it as is. Okay, just go. You transfer a domain. Don't try to make any changes. Transfer it and wait a week. Okay, after it's been on Hover for a week, then if you want to start changing things, that's fine. Changing IP addresses and stuff like that. But the actual move, there should be absolutely no interruption whatsoever because Hover and NetSol have the same records. It's just a matter of who is the registrar at that point. Back in the day, I used to have a like a 5-digit NetSol account name back when they had numbers. I've been doing it that long. Can you have a 6-digit? I'm sorry. Can you have multiple SPF records? I've heard it's have best for. I mean, it's a text record, so there's nothing that will prevent you from putting multiple records in there. But SPF, if I remember correctly, looks for a text record with just the domain name, no machine name or subdomain or anything like that. So you can only have one of those. If you really feel the need to do that, I would look into subdomains, but I have never once seen it necessary to have multiple SPF records. I'm kind of stretching to figure out why you would want to do that in the beginning. When migrating, how are we doing on time? I got 8 minutes. Okay. When migrating a site, instead of changing DNS, can we change only the A records and still have email properly? This is from Maureen. Yes, Maureen. And when you say migrating a site, I assume you mean from one host to another. And if that's what you mean, then yeah, simply change the A record to point to the new IP address. If you're going to be changing the A record, or if you're moving your registrar and your website, I highly recommend moving the registrar first. Don't make any changes to the zone file. Let that settle for a week. Let that propagate and everybody's got it. Then start moving the website and changing the A record. Okay. And quite honestly, most of the time when I'm migrating sites, I have a script that I run because most of my sites, the SiteGround migrator can't handle the size of it. I've got a script that I run, and I'll run it while I'm making my zone change or stuff like that. I'll run the script 5-10 times, and all it does is it wipes what's there and reruns it, and then I double check, make sure everything. Once I know that I can reliably move it, then I begin the actual migration. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt, Carl.
Yes.
We have a question with 9 votes. It's from Volkert. Do you see it at the top?
See it at the top. Okay. Oh, Volkert. Okay. We have a new website, but the old one is still on the web, which we have not been able to take down. Will DNS send everyone over to our new site? Is there any way to find out where the old site is hosted and take it down? No one in our organization knows. Okay. Yes, that's an excellent question. First, to answer the question, yes, changing DNS to your new IP address will change that. Okay. If you have access to DNS, you are in control. As far as where is it hosted, go to Whois, okay, domaintools.com, and run a Whois on the domain now before you make any changes. And that will tell you, that'll give you clues as to where it's hosted. Okay, now, Signaling PHP didn't tell me it was hosted at Google or hosted at SiteGround. It told me that it was in the Google Cloud. But then I can start running backwards from there and find out who actually that IP address is assigned to. And from there, I can find out who's actually hosting it and taking it down. Honestly, once you've made the DNS change, it's kind of a moot point. But hey, if you want to do it, you can. Okay. Where did I leave off? There's new ones in there. LG, when I choose what version of my domain name, www or non-www, I want to show up in a user's browser, do I have to create an A record to point all the others to that student URL? Actually, that would be a CNAME record, not an A record. And no, I would, if I'm doing this and I've got WordPress, okay, I would handle it in WordPress, not in, actually you couldn't handle it in the domain, but WordPress has the ability to forward things down to that. If you've got www, well, I have a website, Uncle Cal's Dive Club. And if you go to www.unclecalsdiveclub.com, it just redirects you to, or it 301s you down to just Uncle Cal's Dive Club, because that's what I want people to go to. That's where all my images are hosted. That's where my secure certificate is. You can do that. I question whether it's worth the effort. Okay. www and the domain name are by convention both available, and I don't see the value of forcing people into one, especially if you're using Let's Encrypt for your SSL. If you're using a paid SSL and you only have your domain name or you only have www, I can see the value in it. But otherwise, I would just let them both coexist. But if you absolutely want to, that's something you handle at your web server, not at your domain server. Can I give a super brief explanation of a AAA record, please? No, I have never once since I started doing DNS had to set up a AAA record, so I really could not even begin to. Does the www matter anymore? That's really up to you. By convention, we always have it in there. I've got sites where I don't. I have a couple of sites where I have a couple of sites where only APIs talk to the site anyhow. So no, I don't. And I actually have one. I have a blog for my scuba diving, and it doesn't have a www. It is dive.calevans.com, and there's no www on there. So, but I guess dive serves the purpose that www would. So, but does it matter? That's up to you. If it doesn't matter to you, I'm sure it doesn't matter to your people. When migrating a site, instead of changing DNS, we change only the A record. These things are moving too fast. Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Yes, good question. If you're moving a site to a new IP address and you go into your DNS zone editor and you say, I'm changing this A record on www to the new IP address, as long as you've not messed with your mail servers or anything like that, mail's going to continue to flow just like it does now. Okay. No, I'm not going to answer that one. If it's the World Wide Web, why do some domain names have the initials of the country at the end? That's what's called a top-level domain. And originally there were three, .org, .com, .edu. Then NetSol said, hey, let's sell a few more. And so they started opening them up. Actually, I take it back. Right before the internet, or right as the internet went commercial, every country was given a top-level domain, and they could assign their own registrar. Okay. And NetSol picked up a lot of those, but a lot of them you have, if you're getting some of these smaller countries, they have their own registrar, and you have to go to them to register a domain. Then NetSol said, hey, let's sell a lot of them. And so we had an awful lot of them. There's one .xxx, and originally it was thought that all the porn sites would just move to .xxx. That did not happen. I used to own calevans.com, calevans.sexy. I let that one go a long time ago. But, they're just top-level domains, and there's a bunch of them out there these days. If you go to SiteGround and try to register a site, it'll show you a list of all the top-level domains that it can register, and you can see them all there. And just depends on what you want. These days, they mean a lot less. Used to be some countries would force companies into a .co, .country, or something like that. Most of those rules have gone away. I believe I am out of time. I am so sorry because there's a bunch of questions that I didn't get to. I hope y'all have enjoyed this. I hope you found it informative. If you have, please tell all your friends. Next month, like I said, show up early. I dish out free technical advice, and I guarantee you it is worth every penny you pay for it. Talk to y'all later.